Nicole Carignan, Head of Customer Success at CounterCraft, who's going to talk about deception in the cyber domain. Please take it away.
Good morning. Welcome to the CyberWorld stage. I want to say thank you to Intrusion and all those who have set up the CyberWorld stage and invited me to come on. I am excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about deception and how critical it is for the future, especially for military, federal, but not just that, commercial. My name is Nicole Carignan. I'm the head of customer success for North America for CounterCraft Security, Inc. We are a deception tech startup. I'll give you a little bit of a background about me before I jump into the company. I spent, I'd say about 24 years in IT and cybersecurity. I spent 15 of those supporting the intelligence community, DoD elements, and now working in the commercial sector for the last 3 to 4 years. Today we're going to talk about how you can use deception to get adversary-generated threat intelligence. So as you see from here, we're going to talk about technical evidence of an attack on the Ukrainian government infrastructure through one of our deception environments. I'll give a quick background on my company that has the deception tech startup, CounterCraft. We started about 6 years ago out of the GCHQ incubator, which is the UK's NSA. We are funded in our pre-series funding by Incutel, CIA's investment arm. And, I can maybe show some more visual stuff. Our staff, including myself, has decades of experience within the community, and we've had contracts with Europol, Interpol, the Air Force. We competed in a deception RFP for the entire DoD through the Defense Innovation Unit, and we just signed on a contract that is open to the entire federal government, the U.S. federal government, with a $26 million ceiling. So they're trying to open up deception to the rest of the community. Gartner Cool Vendor, AWS Defense Accelerator, since we're a startup, they're getting us integrated into their secure cloud. And so multiple ways of bringing deception to all the organizations that need it. So adversary-generated threat intelligence. I'd say I spent the last 13 years of my career in threat intelligence, and anyone who's worked in a SOC or worked with threat intelligence is completely burned out, frustrated, alert fatigue, struggling with the quality of their threat intelligence feeds, and just overwhelmed in general. And so deception is kind of a interesting solution for this, not one that you would innately think would be the solution. But deception provides adversary-generated threat intelligence in real time. So actual adversaries targeting your network and infrastructure, how they're attacking you, what are their TTPs, what are their IOCs. But it also gives you a vehicle to deflect and divert them into a deception environment to prolong your response time and how you want to engage the threat actor. And so in this particular case, we're going to talk about a case study that happened 2 weeks before the big cyber attack on the Ukrainian government infrastructure. So we're going to jump back to January 29th. One of our customers is a Fortune 500 financial institution, global institution, and we were setting up deception for them in order to find out how they're being attacked, how adversaries were coming after their infrastructure, what did they want, and how they were going to go after it. In one of these deception environments, it took a turn. We actually saw more state-related activity and testing of tools and capabilities on how they were going to perform the mass DDoS attack on Ukrainian government infrastructure 2 weeks later on February 15th. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to walk you through the technical evidence of what we saw within our deception environment. So the data from this was collected on January 29th in that testing or in that deception environment, and we saw them and what kind of tools they were using to set up the mass distributed DDoS attack on February 15th. And as we learned from history, in 2014, there was a mass DDoS attack prior to Russia's invasion of Crimea. So the mass DDoS attack was a precursor to a physical kinetic war. And in this particular case, 2 weeks prior, we saw an actor's testing of tools of how they were going to do a DOS. And they actually ended up performing a denial of service on the Cabinet of Ministers website in Ukraine from our infrastructure. So just to show some of the information about the actual DDoS attack that happened on February 15th, as you see here, Private Bank is one of Ukrainian's largest commercial banks. They were attacked by compromised Netgear routers, Hikvision cameras, other IoT devices, and they had a C2 server doing the mass attacks on Private Bank. Another example was the use of Katana botnet, which is a variant of Mirai, and they were using compromised MikroTik routers in that particular coordinated effort. And this was all reported by the Ukrainian CERT organization. So let's jump back 2 weeks prior to the mass attack. This is the timeline of events. Within our deception environment, the threat actor spent about 49 minutes exactly within our environment. And it all happened overnight. Now remember, the initial target of this operation was a Fortune 500 global financial institution. So in this particular case, they had obtained user credentials and were going to try to get in. And we'll see the tactics they use while they're in the environment. But this happened overnight, so 0010 GMT. Next, they went, I'll talk about this later. But next, they tried to compromise the Polkit vulnerability, and so a pkexec exploit. Then they moved on to, because they weren't able to install a compiler, they tried to do a already compiled ELF binary of the same type of exploit. When they failed to do that, as typical threat actors do, they tried to clean up all their evidence, which was moot since they were in a completely instrumented environment and we were capturing everything in real time. Then they modified the SSH authorization keys to gain persistence and to lock other potential people out. And then after gaining persistence, they started performing typical threat actor system discovery and network discovery tools. A lot of the system discovery commands that we saw, and we'll go through this, were to test that they were in a real environment, so that they weren't in an emulated environment, a sandboxed or controlled environment. And thankfully, because we have a deception platform that is actually installed on real assets, virtual and physical, we pass all the tests of muster that a threat actor would perform to ensure that they're in a real environment and that it looks like the organization they think they're getting into. And next, they actually tried to set up an automated, basically create it to be a zombie bot for the DDoS attack that was going to happen 2 weeks later. When they failed in that attempt, they just set up a very simple but elegant DOS attack on the Cabinet of Ministers in Ukraine. So let's get started. I'm going to quickly go through these slides, but I'm a visual person, so I want to make sure you guys see this. But this is essentially, you're seeing the bash history of what the threat actor performed within our deception environment. As soon as it logged in via SSH from the Tor network, it started performing system discovery commands. Next, it went to GitHub to get readily available exploit tools. So it also hides attribution because these are available to anybody who has access to a browser. And in this particular case, they were trying to exploit a vulnerability that had only been reported a month prior by CISA. So they were hoping to be landing on a box that hadn't gotten a chance to be patched yet. And so it was a very short window that they were hoping that this server was vulnerable to. As you can see here in the very first command, there's a typo. And so this kind of gave us an indicator that it was a human actor behind the keyboard and that this wasn't bot activity. At this point, they tried to compile the exploit that they downloaded from GitHub, and we didn't have a compiler installed. So they tried to install GCC, but they had regular user access, so they failed in that attempt. So their next try was to download an already pre-compiled ELF binary for the same vulnerability. It's just called Polkit in this particular exploit. And so they downloaded that again from GitHub, also masking the tools and the trades of them and trying to hide attribution. And because this particular server was not vulnerable to this exploit, they failed. Once the attacker realized that they weren't going to be able to elevate their privileges, because the pkexec Polkit exploit is, I could go back and talk to that a little bit. It is a vulnerability that is used to, or it is a tool within the Unix operating system that controls system-wide privileges so that a non-privileged process can communicate with a privileged process. This vulnerability lay dormant for 12 plus years and it was unreported. And so it allowed a threat actor to get in, escalate their privilege, go from a normal user to root access very quickly. Once they realized that we had already patched the server and that they weren't getting a compromised box, they tried to start cleaning up all their evidence. And like I said, we're in a fully instrumented deception environment. We're gathering everything in real time. We were getting alerts in real time of their activity. So it didn't matter how much cleanup they tried to do. After that, they wanted to just ensure that they had persistence of access, that they could lock out anybody else that might have gotten their hands on these credentials, and I'm guessing, try to log in back later and try it with additional tools to see if their server was vulnerable to anything else. So in this particular case, they modified the SSH authorized keys file to maintain persistence. They changed the user password and locked everybody else out. After that, so this is where we're starting to see some potential attribution flags. Up until this point, the only thing we could tell was that it was a human actor because of the typo. But they were using tools that are readily available to anybody on GitHub. So here we see that they are using a Cyrillic or Russian character keyboard with an English keyboard. They actually created a script in VI called translates essentially to hello.py. This Python script just calls for an additional script to get downloaded from a command and control server in Frantech Solutions. This Frantech Solutions hosting provider is a medium fraud hosting provider. They have Tor connections, public VPN, public proxies, so they are abused quite often. So in this particular case, they download the second script. The second script translates to information.py, so another Python script. In this Python script, they're just executing and gathering information on the system, essentially doing verification that they're on a real system, also getting details on that system as to potential ways to exploit it and get further within the network. After that, they created a PERL file, which by piping a base 64 string into it, which is a classic obfuscation, it allows you to transport binary over systems that support text. And that PERL script essentially was an old school IRC bot that could be used to execute commands and launch a DDoS attack. The same old school IRC bot can also be used for things like setting up crypto mining zombies. There's multiple kind of functions, and we'll go into details here. But as you see here, in this particular case, this PERL script is in Portuguese. So again, I think it's just readily available tools that are out there and easily able to obtain and trying to send false flags of attribution. So here, what this particular old IRC bot does is it connects them to a command and control server on a specific channel and has them wait for additional instructions. In this particular case, it was going to try to set up a bot for the DDoS attack. So it would download a Trojan on the Unix operating system, and then select a target and start a UDP flood attack, open up a reverse shell, and basically you have a proxy or an additional component of your DDoS botnet. It also can be used, like I said, for other purposes. Because of the lack of privileges for the user, they were unable to install the Trojan, and that's why it failed essentially to make this server as a part of their botnet. The same IP address that was the C2 server for the IRC bot was also used, it's been flagged, for setting up crypto mining zombies. So it can be, like I said, it's really just taking a server, installing any kind of Trojan, and then essentially setting up a channel of communication that can use it for any type of operation. In this case, it was Dota 3, which is a crypto mining zombie botnet. So this was kind of interesting. This is the first time we actually saw this type of behavior in one of our deception environments. So after that failed, they decided to create 1 billion empty files, and it was, again, another Python script that was translated from Cyrillic into what we consider money, and then deleting them. And the only thing that we can think of is why they did this was to verify they weren't in an emulated environment, that they could create multiple things and delete, and to verify their privileges, their access, but also that they weren't in an emulated environment. And for anybody here who is familiar with deception, a lot of people use deception in emulated environments, and unfortunately it doesn't pass the test of veracity for most threat actors whenever they come in. And then the next step, they just sent up a very simple bash loop curl command that would perform a denial of service attack on the Ukrainian cabinet of ministers website. It was very simple but effective. It ran for a few hours before we decided to kick him out and clean up the systems. So again, this all happened 2 weeks prior to the big DDoS attack that happened February 15th. So we believe that this was a precursor or testing of tools, and we were able to capture it all within the deception environment in real time. This is just the MITRE attack framework techniques that we observed within the environment during this attack. Everything is automatically correlated. Deception really values TTPs over IOCs because obviously threat actors, as soon as an IOC is reported or a file hash is reported, they modify it so that they can evade detection. In this particular case, those TTPs are what we want. How are they going after people? What exploits are they trying, or what vulnerabilities are they trying to exploit? What tools they are using, and obviously any attribution that we can gather. That gives us more valuable adversary-generated threat intelligence as to how you're currently being attacked and how you can divert them, redirect them, shore up your defenses. And that's how we typically use deception. A lot of times we just start placing breadcrumbs within the operating environment to lure them to what we believe to be their target. And they happen to go through this, and they get into a deception environment. We waste all their time and resources there while we shore up defenses. We've been a part of numerous exercises with military organizations in multiple, I'd say, I think it was up to 7 countries now, where we even have the red team operators go up against our deception environments to check their veracity, and they think that they get the information they're looking for, but they actually get all of the deception information that we seeded in the environment. Here are the IOCs from this particular attack. Mitigations for this attack. I'm not going to go into many details because we're not talking about how to mitigate from every cyber attack within this stage today, but today we're talking about how we can use deception to essentially shore up organizations' defenses and protect their more critical assets. So the implications for this for the organizations. So in this particular case, the initial target was a Fortune 500 financial institution. And they pivoted, and we started seeing tools for what looked like more state-sponsored activity, but not at the sophisticated level of a more state-sponsored actor. But of course, it looked like it's a part of a more coordinated effort that happened 2 weeks later. And we also know that there was lots of guidance going out that if Russia was to invade Ukraine, multiple countries would levy financial sanctions, and the next target would be global financial institutions that were a part of levying those sanctions. And this particular target would have been one of those organizations. So when the threat actor who got into the environment was unable to achieve their initial mission, which was to get elevated privileges and have access to this Fortune 500 financial institution, they pivoted and started testing other tools that would be part of a more coordinated effort 2 weeks later. CISA came out very shortly after this with guidance as to how to protect an organization from a damaging cyber intrusion. It was called Shields Up. Reduce the likelihood of a damaging cyber attack, quickly detect the potential intrusion, ensure the organization is prepared to respond, and maximize the organization's resilience. This is how we use deception to do that. In order to reduce the likelihood of a cyber intrusion, so modify your attack surface. Put digital twins of forward-facing assets and scatter breadcrumbs that would lure a threat actor away from the actual production assets and into your deception assets, but they look and feel just like the production assets. Alter your attack surface, divert them away from what you know the threat actor's target's going to be. And there are also ways to deploy deception internally to attempt to tackle that zero trust that everybody is trying to tackle. But essentially, you deploy deception inside your networks, in any one of your critical network segments. You scatter breadcrumbs of what you think threat actors would be after, so that they would, in turn, go into one of our deception environments, immediately be detected, and you already know you have an insider threat or a compromised user or host. Take steps to quickly detect the potential intrusion. The good thing about deception is you have a fully instrumented environment where you are capturing everything and you get immediate alerts. And it isn't false positives, because you know that anyone going into the deception hosts or environment in the first place are most likely there for malicious intent. Ensure the organization can respond to an intrusion if it occurs. Well, the good thing is you can use deception to get pre-breach detection, so you're basically detecting an attack before it actually hits your production infrastructure. And then you get to mess with the threat actors once they're in your deception environment. I mean, what way to deter their activity is to mess with the actions that they're trying to actually perform. So they upload a vulnerability exploit, you delete it or move it to a different directory. Or you scatter breadcrumbs that would take them to a different area that they think that they want to go to. So we call it threat actor engage, response, mitigation. But this allows you more time to shore up your defenses, as well as spend their resources. And many times when you start messing with them and when they're in the middle of an operation, they already think they're being detected and they will abort the mission. So it is a good technique for deterring an actual intrusion. And then maximizing the organization's resilience. It's all about risk mitigation. So you can set up digital twins of your critical infrastructure that has, like, say you can't patch all of the servers within your operating environment. So you set up a digital twin that mimics those same vulnerabilities or those same unpatched systems, and you lure a threat actor into the deception environment and watch to see how they attack. So at this point, you get immediate detection and alert. You know you can start mitigating any risk, and also you see how your infrastructure is going to be attacked. Sometimes this is really handy too, where you believe you have a fully patched system with no vulnerabilities, but if you've altered your attack surface with digital twins and you're using deception, you can see how servers are being attacked before those vulnerabilities have been released or known. I talked a little bit about this, so I won't get into it. I'm an engineer by trade, so if you can't tell, my slides are super wordy. But I'm sure they're available afterward for anyone who wants to use them as a response. But we've talked about most of this, so I'll move on. But implementing that zero trust is really implementing deception within the production network. So outside of the attack surface, but actually on critical subnets, and scattering breadcrumbs on production assets that would lure them to deception assets that we would be able to detect that insider threat or compromised user or account immediately. Are you ready for deception? There's multiple ways to do it. Like I said, you can run things externally so that you want to try deception out, you want to modify your attack surface, and then you can start moving internal deception in your segmented networks. We have ability for minimal communication deployments or no communication deployments if you want to protect those more critical assets like OT or ICS infrastructure. And you're gathering that valuable adversary-generated threat intelligence as to how adversaries are actually attacking you and the detection. I always create reference links. And then that's it. I got through this pretty quickly. We've got like 4 minutes for questions. Does anybody have any questions?
All right, so that was an amazing presentation by Nicole. I really haven't seen it. I wasn't aware that we were delivering the enemy their own medicine to quite such a degree as what you presented here. So questions before I have a few for her. So Nicole, this is what you presented is absolutely fascinating and really creates a tremendous amount of interference for the bad actors to actually get what they're, to achieve what they'd like to do. And you may even think they have achieved what they want to do, right? And not. But it seems like this is a fairly resource-intensive way to thwart cyber attacks and to fight cyber attacks. What sort of organization typically has these types of capabilities? Is this pretty much only nation states and agencies, or is this something that smaller groups can look at adopting over time, and are you looking at automated to make it easier for them?
So if you noticed on our previous screen, we actually are working with a state government organization that has an extremely small cybersecurity team. And they have a pretty small footprint for their network, but they've implemented deception creatively. So the resource intensive that he's talking about is that you're just going to need additional hosts and servers that mimic some of your production assets. But we by no means think it needs to be a one-to-one. You just need to scatter those carefully crafted breadcrumbs that are within our product to lure a threat actor to the deception assets so that you can get that detection and that threat intelligence. So they've deployed, on the smallest scale, one of our customers has deployed only 6 deception assets. It's a much smaller scale. Of course, we have Fortune 500 just financial institutions that want to do something in every one of their segments, but it varies between them size.
Though, that you've productized this deception capability?
Yes.
You don't necessarily need to do it with people live?
No, yes, exactly. So this is all a software product. So the creation of the management console to gather all this adversary-generated threat intelligence takes about 10 minutes. The deployment of we create proxies to protect our communication, and we have an encrypted C2 channel for our deception assets. And then the instrumentation and the creation of a deception asset, as long as it's a real asset, virtual or physical, it takes 2 minutes.
So that's fascinating. So this is within the access of mere mortals. You don't need to have a special group or a tiger team with all these hard to find people. This is something that most organizations could actually stand up today.
Yes, 100%. And we're noticing, because it's kind of more on the bleeding edge of different tech that's out there, that of course the first adopters in commercial or financial institutions, because they have the budget for that type of cybersecurity solutions. But we're hoping, as you see with big pushes from organizations like MITRE or Gartner, they're all trying to push that deception is another critical piece of your cybersecurity solution in the future.
Well, fantastic. Well, that was an amazing exploration of deception technology and the current state of the art. It's got to be. Would everyone please give a hand to Nicole for her great presentation? Thank you.
Thank you for coming, and thanks for having me.